In pop culture, Harrison Ford didn't get to be just one legend.
Damn music follows me everywhere.
He got to be three. Han Solo, the fastest, cockiest smuggler in the galaxy. Indiana Jones, the archaeologist who took on Nazis and ancient relics with nothing but a whip. And Rick Deckard, the man chasing the line between human and replicant through a city of acid rain. Here's the problem. When Hollywood summoned these legends back under the banner of the Legacy sequel, fans didn't get the joyful reunion they'd been hoping for. What they got was closer to an obituary. Han Solo splits from Leia, slides from hero back to smuggler, and finally dies at the hand of his own son while trying to save him. Indiana Jones loses his son, watches his marriage collapse, and ends up an old man who can't even summon his old spark in the lecture hall. And sure, if a hero is a man and not a god, he's allowed to grow old. A hero can fail again. He can lose the people he loves. Life can refuse to go according to plan. The problem isn't the wrinkles that time leaves behind. The problem is whether those wrinkles are marks that formed naturally over a character's life, or just seasoning sprinkled on top with the attitude of, let's burn down everything the originals achieved and use it as fuel to start a new movie. So doesn't the same apply to Rick Deckard in Blade Runner 2049? Deckard's situation is no walk in the park either. Rachel, the woman he ran away with, died giving birth. To protect his daughter, Deckard had to vanish from the world for 30 years. Seclusion sounds noble, but really he's an old man living alone in a radioactive wasteland, drinking bootleg whiskey with a single dog for company. On the facts alone, it's hard to argue he ended up any less miserable than Han Solo or Indiana Jones. And yet, strangely, we don't feel the same sense of betrayal watching Deckard. If anything, Blade Runner 2049 tends to get praised as a sequel that didn't ruin its legacy. Why is that? Today's point is simple. What broke Han Solo and Indiana Jones wasn't tragedy. It was tragedy that rendered everything before it meaningless. So how did Deckard's story manage to sidestep the problem of meaningless tragedy? The first and simplest reason is genre. Blade Runner was never a world where the hero walks off into the sunset with a grin. This is a world where neon is more familiar than blue sky, where acid rain is more familiar than sunlight, where someone asking, "Am I human?" feels almost like a luxury, about to be drowned out by cigarette smoke and the wail of a saxophone leaking from some advertisement. It's a neo-noir dystopia. In the world of Han Solo and Indiana Jones, misery isn't the default. Misery is an obstacle in the adventure, something to be overcome. But in the world of Blade Runner, misery is the air itself. Loneliness, loss, the uncertainty of memory, the confusion of identity. All of it is the work's native language. Deckard's happy ending was never about changing the world. It was about reclaiming his humanity through his love for Rachel in a dark and indifferent world. So the idea that Deckard spent 30 years in hiding doesn't land with the audience as, wait, you found a peaceful ending last time. How did it come to this? But as, yeah, in this world, that figures. And that's a huge difference. When Han Solo becomes a smuggler again, it feels like his growth has been reset to zero. When Indiana Jones loses every ounce of life's vitality, right down to his archaeology lectures, it feels like the energy of the adventure genre he belongs to has flickered out. But when Deckard hides among the ruins, it feels like the natural result of a man adapting to the loneliness the world of Blade Runner always carried inside it. To put it simply, Deckard still has the thing he had at the end of the first film, his humanity. Think of the scene where Kay asks whether the dog is real, and Deckard refuses to spell it out. Ask him. That's why Deckard's misery doesn't feel like character assassination. It's a tragedy written in the same grammar the world of Blade Runner used from the very beginning. So when you go back and rewatch the victory celebration in Return of the Jedi, or the wedding in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, a strange bitterness creeps in. At the time, those clearly looked like endings that moved forward, and then the sequels came along and buried each one under an enormous new loss. Of course, real life can unfold that way too. The question is whether that loss feels like the messy complexity of a real life, or like a reset button pressed to get a new story rolling. Yes, in reality, everything may eventually amount to nothing, but that's no excuse to reduce the story itself to nothing. The second reason is the strange history of Blade Runner as a film. Honestly, if you only look at the 1982 theatrical cut, Blade Runner 2049 is a pretty cruel sequel. The theatrical Blade Runner gave us a relatively hopeful ending, with Deckard and Rachel leaving the city behind for green, open country. There was even a voiceover explaining that Rachel, unlike other replicants, had no built-in expiration date. So for an audience that only remembers that version, 2049 might feel like this. Hold on, the two of us drove off happily into the wild. Where did the death in childbirth and the 30-year exile suddenly come from? Is this refundable? But Blade Runner isn't an ordinary movie. It's a strange piece of work that has spent more than 30 years revising its own ending. Through the 1992 director's cut and the 2007 final cut, Blade Runner steadily erased that brighter ending of escape. What was left in the audience's mind, in the end, wasn't a happy ending of running off into green fields. It was the lonely, open-ended image of an elevator door sliding shut. The moment that door closed, we already knew. We knew there was no way the future of these two could be smooth. We knew the love between Rachel and Deckard wasn't a love that had escaped into a safe world, but a love living inside a world where they could be hunted down and destroyed at any moment. And we knew they chose it anyway, with their eyes open. So the tragedy of 2049 isn't a cheap shot out of nowhere. It's the reality that was always waiting on the other side of a door that had been closing for a very long time. This is the important part. 2049 doesn't ignore the ending of the original. If anything, it takes the original's anxiety seriously. It doesn't take the easy route of saying, "And so they lived happily ever after." Instead, it asks, if that love really began in a dangerous world, what price would they have had to pay to protect their happiness? Because that question exists, Rachel's death and Deckard's exile aren't just misery piled on for its own sake. They don't negate the romance of the first film. They belatedly reveal just how dangerous and how miraculous that romance was, blooming in such a merciless world. A good sequel doesn't say to the film that came before it, "You were wrong." It says, "The question you raised isn't finished yet." Blade Runner 2049 is much closer to the second. Now, none of this means you can release a happy ending in theaters and then bolt a tragedy onto it later, just because a director's cut and a final cut happen to exist. What matters more is that the world of Blade Runner carried that anxiety from the very start. Even the theatrical cut's bright escape was less a happy ending from some entirely different genre, and more a small crack of light barely stolen from a dark world. Finally, the most decisive difference of all, legacy. When a legacy sequel calls an old hero back, this is exactly the most dangerous moment. How is it going to use the legacy that character left behind? In the Han Solo and Indiana Jones sequels, the relationships and achievements those characters left behind get used less as a warm foundation for a new story, and more as a convenient device to get the plot moving. Han Solo's family history becomes fuel for a galaxy-sized tragedy. Indiana Jones's son dies off-screen, and that death is handed to us as the setup that shatters Indy's life. You can't say these choices are completely meaningless, of course. Each film has its own intentions. But the problem is how the audience experiences it. When the hard-won achievements of a previous film are presented as already broken before the new movie has even begun, the audience sees the invoice before it feels the loss. Ah, this misery was needed to get the new movie rolling. The instant you feel that, tragedy stops being an emotion and becomes a device. Deckard's legacy, on the other hand, is different. Deckard and Rachel's child, Dr. Stelline, isn't just a wound that exists to torment the hero. She's a miracle that shakes the entire world of Blade Runner. The fact that a replicant can be born. the possibility that beings once thought of as manufactured can carry life forward, leave memories behind, and make history. This isn't simply a matter of family history. It's an event that changes the very philosophy of the Blade Runner world. The question the first film asked was this: what makes a human being human? 2049 looks like it's just repeating that question. And in fairness, it is repeating it. But it doesn't stay in exactly the same place. 2049 expands it. Even if a memory was manufactured, is the choice you made because of that memory real? Even if your origin is artificial, can love and sacrifice still be real? If a manufactured being gives birth to its own future, can we still call it a thing?
At the center of all those questions stands Deckard's daughter.
So Deckard's 30-year exile isn't simply shabby treatment. He wasn't just abandoned by the world. He didn't run away because he couldn't face his problems. He's a man who erased his own existence from the world in order to protect his daughter. Deckard's absence isn't the result of irresponsibility. It was a choice made to hide the one being he loved. And that difference is decisive. If the wounds of Han Solo and Indiana Jones sometimes felt like they were erasing the achievements of the originals, Deckard's wounds worked to prove how much meaning the original's love actually carried. He wasn't given a happy life, but his life was never rendered meaningless. That's why Deckard survived. What's clever about Blade Runner 2049 is that it doesn't put Deckard at the center of the frame from the start. From the very beginning, the emotional center of the film is Kay. Kay chases the belief that he might be someone special, only to learn in the end that he isn't the chosen child. And yet, in that exact moment, he makes the most human choice of all. Even after learning he isn't the protagonist, he nobly helps someone else's story reach its completion. Because of this, Deckard's return isn't simply the comeback of an old star. It becomes the destination that Kay's choice has to reach. In a way, Kay is a noir Buzz Lightyear. He believed he was someone special, only to discover he was mass-produced. But the important thing is what comes next. Just as Buzz, even after accepting that he's a toy, still helps Woody and goes to save him, Kay, even after learning he isn't the miracle child, still delivers Deckard to his daughter. It's the genuine completion of a new character's arc, working in harmony with a legacy character. In the end, what Blade Runner 2049 showed us isn't that a legacy sequel has to make its old hero happy. The opposite. You're allowed to make the old hero unhappy. You're allowed to make him old. You're allowed to let him lose. You're even allowed to leave him drinking bootleg whiskey in a radioactive zone for 30 years. There's just one condition. That misery must not become a tool for erasing what came before. That misery has to be the price that deepens the question the original asked. The reason the Han Solo and Indiana Jones sequels felt so painful to so many fans is that their tragedies sometimes looked less like the depth of a real life and more like devices repossessing everything the originals had achieved. Blade Runner 2049, by contrast, didn't give Deckard a happy life, but it never said his life was meaningless either. He lost. He hid. He endured. And at the end of all that loss, the miracle he had tried to protect was still alive. That's the difference. Deckard isn't a character stripped of the original's glory. He's a character who carried the original's question all the way to the end. That's why Deckard survived. He didn't become a shadow of the past like Han Solo or Indiana Jones. He became part of the answer the world of Blade Runner finally had to arrive at. In the end, the whole difference comes down to a single sentence. What broke Han Solo and Indiana Jones wasn't tragedy itself. It was tragedy that erased the meaning of what came before. And what saved Deckard wasn't a perfect happy ending. It was a tragedy that held on to the achievements of the original and their meaning right to the very end. Wallace tells Deckard that his memories, and even his love, might have been designed. But Deckard holds on to one thing to the end: the eyes he remembers, the love he felt, and the sacrifice he chose because of that love. In the world of Blade Runner, what proves your humanity isn't a perfect birth certificate. It's a heart you chose for yourself, imperfect memories and all. And so Deckard's story ends like this. If you enjoyed today's video, please like and subscribe. And what do you think? Did the Han Solo and Indiana Jones sequels really ruin them? Or were we just not ready to accept them growing old? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching.